Welcome back to Yahoo Finance Live. Energy prices remain the story of the summer as heat waves and droughts compound supply issue. And on Tuesday, natural gas hit another record high as heat waves in Europe drive demand while Russia throttles supply. And in China, a similar story as economists warn the ongoing heat wave and power outages could have serious implications on the country's economy. Here to discuss the economic implications of these extreme climate conditions around the globe is Raymond James Managing Director and Research Analyst Pavel Molchanov. Thanks so much for joining the show this morning. I want to begin, Pavel, here with exactly what we're talking about here. Hydropower generation is indeed a kind of an afterthought, if you will, as we talk about these drought headlines. What's the story on that front? What are you seeing in terms of the energy shift that could be actually more longer term?
Right. Hydro needs water. Very simple. Less water, hydroelectric dams are less productive. There is no escaping that. So what we need to think about is what parts of the world are the most reliant on hydropower. Europe is actually in a pretty good position in that sense because not much of Europe's electricity mix is hydro. This is a big problem, though, in South America. Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, and I might add Canada, too. Canada and Brazil get about 2/3 of their electricity from hydro. In Europe, it's more like 15% on average. So not nearly as big a deal. By the way, in the US, it's only about 6% of US electricity coming from hydro. So it varies, but hydro also has consequences in two other sources of electricity. One is nuclear. You might think, well, why do you need water for nuclear? Because water is the basic coolant of nuclear reactors. And if there is not enough water, then the reactor will shut down in some cases just as a safety measure. We haven't had that so far in Europe, but it is something to think about. And then lastly, if you've seen headlines about water levels on major rivers like the Rhine in Germany, at historic lows, well, guess what? At some points, the river is so low that barges carrying coal literally cannot move. Mm-hmm. So power plants are being deprived of feedstock.
So I guess, Pavel, this kind of points to, because we know that with climate issues, these droughts are likely only going to get worse in the future. Is that just bearish for the whole industry of hydroelectric power here? I mean, as you point out, this is a pretty huge industry here, but if the secular trends here are going in one direction, where's the energy supply going to come from in lieu of that?
Well, the lesson is that electricity should always be broadly diversified. So just as having too much reliance on natural gas is a problem in, for example, Germany, because of course Russia has made the political decision to deliberately deprive the European market of gas. Having too much hydro is risky in its own way because of climate risk. So again, major issue in Brazil, certainly a problem in Canada, parts of the Western United States, not as big a deal in Europe, but the point is to be diversified. So, wind, solar, biomass, all of these are ways to diversify the mix away from excessive reliance on any fossil fuel or on hydro.
So do you think policymakers get that message? Because we just saw the Inflation Reduction Act get passed in the United States recently, a lot of wide-ranging climate-related measures in there. Obviously, solar, wind getting some attention. But how much attention did these industries that we're talking about right now get in there? And do you feel like they're factoring in these types of transitions?
Well, in the U.S., fortunately, we do not buy gas from Russia, so that risk is out, and only 6% of U.S. electricity comes from hydro. That being said, from a carbon emissions perspective, the U.S. electricity mix leaves much to be desired. We still get about 1/5 of our electricity from coal, and certainly that needs to essentially go to zero to reach the decarbonization targets by 2050. And more than a third of U.S. electricity comes from gas. So the more non-hydro renewables, which is predominantly wind and solar, in the mix, the better it's going to be.
Raymond James, Managing Director and Research Analyst Pavel Molchanov, thanks so much for stopping by. Have a great weekend.